Engineering, Magic, and Kitsune, Chapter 31, Tattered Truth. "Are you sure, John?" Yuki's voice shook him out of his trance, and he nodded after a moment of thought. Obviously, he wouldn't share anything about her, as it was not his story to tell, but his. There was no avoiding it. Rin had seen him crack at the mere presence of a few men whom he should have been so far beyond that they should be beneath notice. He had to share at least a bit more of the truth, and hope that she was still on board afterwards. Otherwise, it risked her looking for answers, and finding more than what he was okay with, or assuming something worse and going to a hostile party with it. He just had to hope that the woman who was sympathetic enough to the common folk to track down a dangerous bandit would remain a bleeding heart.
It's obvious that I'm a foreigner, yes,"
John cautiously began. Hesitantly, the dragon woman nodded. "Yes, your accent," she trailed off, trying the best to pick her words and looking him up and down. "It's distinctive. Not like anything I've ever seen, going from the northern to southern reaches of this land. Your features, too, are very different, and not quite anything I've seen, even amongst foreign traders and ports." Sighing, he took a seat on a nearby rock. He didn't particularly fear the physical threat of her turning on him here. He had his warding, and Yuki was more than enough to win a fight on his own, never mind with his extra help, which she needed now that his weakness became apparent, and in hardly any time at all since she joined.
"I mentioned I came to this land 5 years ago. That was true. I left out that I did not come to this land on my own free will. I was dumped into this woods one morning with no guide, no way home. The people, did not take kindly to my presence, especially those priests."
"But they're just priests, and you aren't a yokai," Ren exclaimed, frowning. "How could they have kept someone like you away? I've never seen you fight, but the stories I've heard put you above every single one of them."
"Not entirely," he admitted, grimacing. "Until recently, I was unable to speak your language, Ren. For the past half a decade, I've lived alone, isolated, honing my self-taught craft. I used to live a far more peaceful life, and I'm slow to even think about hurting others."
The half-truth tumbled out of him slowly, as if giving up even that much was anathema. Still, they clawed at his heart in another direction for reasons beyond his comprehension. He couldn't share much more, not to Yuki, certainly not to Rin, not to anyone. He couldn't even say them to his reflection, lest the Kitsune's supernatural hearing catch it.
"I was driven into the woods not long after I arrived,"
he began before turning to face Yuki, and beheld the deep, worried frown on her face. This next part was intended for her, too.
"Those, priests and their ilk have tried to kill me many, many times. Sometimes they get closer than others.
Sometimes he still woke up in the middle of the night, feeling the phantom heat of his guts nearly cooked inside his own body. The skin around his torso charred black like something left in an oven overlong. He spent many days prying stone fragments out of limbs, spiked like cruel barbs that grew in his flesh, to make themselves as painful and as difficult to remove as humanly possible. It was a small mercy that he found out about the healing properties of some of the local plants sooner rather than later. Otherwise, he would have died a myriad of times over from them alone. He shook himself out of his reverie as he realized he was staring past the Kitsune like a complete nutcase.
"I'm sorry. I was lost in thought for a moment. Regardless, I do not have the best history with those men, and I'd prefer to avoid them," he finished.
Silence held tensely in the riverbank. "You're self-taught," Rin finally muttered, eyes widening and a blush coloring her face once she realized she said that out loud. What they did is terrible, Sensei. Just say the word, and I'll be happy to—" Her hand went to her blade, and John quickly raised a hand to stop her.
"No," he quickly interrupted before saying, "even if I'm not their biggest fan, I'd rather not have them die to make me more comfortable. No, they'll stop being a serious problem once things settle more."
It was one thing to harass the weird hermit who lived in the woods and couldn't tell anyone what they were doing. It was another thing entirely to attack a man in good standing who had helped drive the ruinously aggressive tax collectors out of the region. Rin's eyes landed on the Kitsune. "You mean you and Yuki only met recently?" the dragon woman hesitantly asked.
He nodded. "Let me just say that the last little while has been an absolute maelstrom of changes."
Guilt clearly ate the dragon unbound as she stared at him, flashing quickly between several intense emotions. "That would mean that I mean, if I got you earlier when she wasn't around to explain, no. I could have." Rin's brow furrowed. An intense frustration painted her face as she tried to find the words, yet failed. The woman stopped struggling with the words, breathed deeply, and threw herself to her knees, bowing so deeply her forehead was touching the ground. She seemed to care little for the dirt clinging to her rather nice clothes, entirely focused on the gesture of supplication, as she was. "I'm sorry, Sensei. I was too close to making a terrible mistake, but please, I ask you to forgive your student once more." John looked uneasily at Yuki, who had a sympathetic frown etched on her face. She gestured to the dragon-blooded and nodded. "You're forgiven," he sighed. Something about this made him feel wrong, like wearing a mask over a mask, but nothing could be done about it. He held out his ungloved hand, offering it. When Rin finally raised her head and to look up, she startled, but hesitantly grabbed on, letting him pull her up to her feet once more. He forced a smile onto his face, but the tightness of his jaw probably gave him way. The unbound was sincere, if nothing else. Before any more words could pass between them, he heard splashing and an awful gurgling. Spinning to see, he saw the same mottled kappa from before putting himself out of the water. He burbled, before flipping himself into a handstand, pointedly keeping the ball on top of his head submerged, and spitting up the water filling his lungs. That awful hawking and choking noises brought whatever conversation was about to ensue between the group to a screeching halt. Like an awkward family conversation on a road trip between silence by a 5-car pileup on the other side of the road. It still felt uncomfortable to watch, like he should leave, but neither Yuki nor Rin seemed to agree, given they unflinchingly stared at the yokai the whole time. Was he the weird one for thinking it was strange? He didn't like that at all. He'll take a lack of hostile presence, screaming for them to get off his lawn as a win. There was nothing to really distract anyone, and nowhere to really look besides the spectacle in front of them. Eventually, the slimy-skinned yokai had cleared himself out and flipped back over with an awkward front flip. "Right, you two are not my favorites, but I'll take you a lot of those." And that was absolutely a swear, though John wasn't sure what it meant. "Any day of the week. They kept on calling and calling for me, and I thought they'd never give up, and there was another swear. "Thanks, I guess. Now, who's the tag-along, and what the hell do you want? I'm not getting chased by Nameless again." Nameless never chased him when he went with them, unless John forgot something. "How dare you?" Rin hissed, stepping forwards and started to reach for her blade. "Sensei John and Lady Yuki came to visit you here, and—" She abruptly stopped as John cleared his throat and shook his head, sheepishly stepping back to his side.
"Rin, he's just like that. Don't worry,"
John soothed. The couple's eyes widened. "What the hell? He can talk like that already? You sure you were—" Yuki flared her presence, bathing the area in an aura of annoyance that made her thoughts clear and cutting him off, only a glare from the grumpy old yokai. "Enough. We have questions for you. Are you aware of any spots in the woods where armed men have been occasionally fishing?" The couple glared at her before momentarily glancing at Rin, but made no argument. "Yeah, I may know a few places. Is this related to the Nameless?" he cautiously asked. "It is," Yuki confirmed. "This problem has gone on long enough, and we have a solution. I can't share everything, but a group of armed men posing as tax collectors is feeding the Nameless for their own purposes. They may have found some way to tame the nest." John kept his gaze fixed on the copper, lest his glance towards Yuki gave him away a little lie. She must have wanted to keep the fact that they believed the Great Nameless was behind this infestation. But why? Now that he thought of it, the Nameless should still not know their suspicions about the Great Nameless controlling their number, in theory. Did she perhaps fear that it would get back to the shadowy spiders? It could provoke a greater, more hostile response before they were prepared. "I know a few spots," the copper slowly began, scratching the side of his head. "My memory is a bit spotty, though. I'm an old man, and it gets hard to remember sometimes." "Greedy fool. People are dying," Rin cut in, only to be silenced with a quick look from Yuki. "I'm taking a lot of risk here," he gasped, putting a hand to his chest. "A few of those guys took shots at me, and it's a terribly traumatic memory to relive. Besides, the forest seemed worse than them, and they're really annoying, but they can't swim." John stepped forward, putting down a basket of fresh produce, which pointedly was not an apology gift.
"Perhaps you'd like some fresh produce from my fields."
The yokai quickly looked between John and the basket, clearly trying to not linger on it for too long, lest he give away just how much he wanted it. After a long moment, he lipped the edges of his weird muzzle beak thing like one might lick their lips and nodded. John still hated that he had teeth, too. The Nameless might think that Yuki could call down some more substantial power to deal with that threat, assuming they still believed her a member of the yokai nobility in good standing. It didn't sound like Nameless hives were often left to their own devices after all. Even if they didn't attack their little band directly, they might try flatten all the local towns to get as much wealth as possible to beef up their numbers, and, well, John doubted they could hold for more than a few minutes against such a force. It'd be scoured to the bone, and every man, woman, and child torn apart at best. The militia would be swept aside like leaves before a storm. The only form of non-yokai superhuman forces in the area were the undead the tax collector had, which would likely be used to defend their own numbers at best, assuming it didn't know, and the priests, who he had no idea how helpful they would be. Rin said something about being baffled about why they would pose him a problem, as he wasn't a yokai, didn't she? Perhaps they had some sort of counter techniques that would be useful, but he doubted there was enough of them to hold the line, if they could even respond in time. They seemed to stay at some sort of temple or shrine out of town, so even if they could somehow sense it, the damage would be done by the time they showed up. Or perhaps Yuki was worried about the news of Greater Nameless making its way back to the yokai nobility, with countless implications that he could not guess at, but he was sure none were good. And past the fifth bend there is a little alcove. It was dug out and hasn't quite healed yet, so it's a pretty good fishing spot. Haven't seen anyone there for a few months, but someone keeps digging it out, so it has to be getting used. The cuppa rattled off. John had entirely spaced out. He hoped that Yuki had gotten that. Thank you. We'll check these dozen or so spots out. Perhaps they'll hold what we seek. If not, we shall return again. Perhaps you'll remember some more, although gentle. She could tell the hidden barb behind a statement. An unspoken, do not screw us over on this was evident, even to him. The turtle yokai grunted, You won't have to, if your lead is good. That's all the spots I've seen armed people fishing on this river in the last few months. Then our business is concluded, but I believe Rin has a proposal for you, Yuki said, with an amused lilt as she stepped back and the dragon woman stepped forward. She still seemed frazzled by the earlier revelations, but that self-assured smile and bearing had begun to return. It stopped short of egotistical, but well within the realm of confident as she strutted forth with an undeniable swagger. You copper, this Nagahama Rin challenges you. Rin, as usual, was loud, bombastic, and felt like she was trying to make sure anyone in the back row of the theatre could hear her. She raised a pointer finger, pointing it to the sky for some reason beyond him. I wager 4 months of servitude, where my will shall be yours, after the matter of the Nameless is resolved. What? Were they going to fight? He should probably stop this. If Rin got hurt, well, there would be much less firepower in the coming days or weeks. Still, seeing her risk that much time felt strange, even if it didn't crack the top 5 of the weirdest things he'd seen and heard do since they met a day ago. Was this how typical unbound yokai dealings go? He glowered at her, unamused. You called me heartless a few minutes ago. Why the hell would I even entertain that? He grunted. When was the last time you had a cucumber? I believe I saw some in town last time I was there. She trailed off, putting her finger to her lips in overdramatic mock thought. Deal, the copper immediately stated. But we won't be fighting. It'll be shogi. Wait, wasn't that kind of Japanese jest? The copper had mentioned it before, but John wasn't the most familiar. There weren't exactly oodles of board games kicking around the fort. Except, Rin loudly stated, the copper took a deep breath before disappearing back underwater. Why the yokai took a breath when he could breathe underwater was beyond him. John didn't say anything at first, unsure what to say as to object without giving himself away. Shogi? He finally asked. The scoffer mentioned shogi bodies to me in the past, and is a few centuries old. He's probably very good. I believe in myself, Sensei, she beamed. Well, at least I made one of them. Soon enough, the water-dwelling spirit burst out of the water again, taking a deep, heaving breaths, and not having to throw up a bunch of water again. Ah, that's why he was holding in some air. That made sense. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized he'd be grumpy too if he had to cough up a couple liters of fluid every time someone knocked on his door. A heavily lacquered board was cradled under his arm, and a very porous bag, which dripped everywhere, was in his hand. Right, I take sente and you take gote, he said, plopping the board down on the table and dumping the pieces out, quickly stepping up to his side. Rin sat across from him, more hesitantly setting up hers. That's not right. Was she having second thoughts? Little showed on her face, the same overconfident expression still painted there. Something didn't add up. Soon enough, they were both set up, and the couple took the first move, sliding one of the front tiles forward. Honestly, he didn't know what any of these things were supposed to move, and he was pretty much along for the ride. Oi, Lord John, move to the side so you can't signal her, the copper said, and John jolted slightly, hurrying to where he saw Yuki standing now that he was paying more attention, to the back of the dragon-blooded. It was a minute before Rin slowly made a move, and something twinged in John's subconscious. The way she put her towel down was confident, but her movements were slow. Long-forgotten memories of Pool Hall started to arise from the depths of time. Hold on. Was she hustling him? The couple scoffed and moved another piece. The same pattern repeated, with Rin considering her move for a long time and gently sliding a piece. Sometimes she pretended to hesitate. Other times her hand hovered over a piece for a long time before selecting another. A quick glance at Yuki revealed a gentle, unworried smile on her face, and John had no doubt that she saw the same. He watched the poor yokai get hustled by Rin of all people. Rin, he had the edge at first, and he may have been a better player too, but many of his moves seemed incredibly aggressive to his uneducated eye. The turning point came when he fell face-first into some sort of trap, throwing what must have been an aggressive piece into a trap, even if it took 2 more turns to actually take piece properly. He blanched and looked at her in a new light. What were initially quick moves became a lot more cautious, and now that she ruse was up, Rin's moves came a lot faster too. It was strange to see pieces re-enter the game from the side of the capturer, but the momentum of the match quickly swapped from the stalemate to an absolute slaughter. He didn't think lizards could sweat, but apparently Copper could. Not one word passed them as he was herded and eradicated by the equivalent of a Disney Trust Fund kid with a protagonist syndrome. He fell back and groaned, swearing, as the bored state rapidly became completely untenable. "I should have just taken the fight," he hissed out, followed by a string of swears that would probably make a sailor blush as he jumped to his feet. Claws. "What do you call the turtle legs?" "I'll take my prize now, please, Sir Copper," Rin calmly said, standing back up, holding up that same finger she pointed upwards again. "Fine, fine," he grumbled, throwing his hands up like a disappointed father. "Last time I accept bets from an unbound, I swear." He put a finger in his mouth. Wait, what was he doing? To his horror, the turtle yokai started violently biting his own finger. It was almost like he was trying to saw through it, with how he brought the beak down again and again, working his jaw back and forth. Great deep gouges were carved into the flesh, and the knuckle bone clearly visible through all the blood. With a crunch, the copper finally bit straight through. John felt sick. Rin held her hands out, and the copper spat his own finger into her waiting palms. And without flinching, she fished the small jar out of her pocket and dropped the bloody appendage in. "Ah, this is going to take forever to come back," the copper complained. The wounds bleeding quickly stopped. "Did you have to take that finger? That's one of my favorites." John hated this universe so much. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.